Have you ever wondered where the slur conspiracy theorist came from and why it's used so widely today? Well, stick around. I'm going to explain it to you. Hello fellow Grumpies. Welcome to the Grumpy Grandpa channel, where we deconstruct issues that impact us all in this increasingly censored world. I'm your host, the Grumpy Grandpa. Now, in this first episode, I want initially to outline why I decided to create this channel. Then we'll look at one of the most insidious slurs ever used in mainstream media today, and why you should always question it. Now, there are a number of reasons for this channel, one of which is because I'm an extremely grumpy old bugger, exceedingly irritated with the crazy events going on in the world today. Also, I'm a granddad, naturally concerned for the well-being of my kids and grandkids. Now, that covers the name. The reason for the content of the channel is my concern over the way information is controlled. In other words, censorship and propaganda as used against us by entities such as big tech and the far left agenda. Now, as I see it, this is a huge problem in today's culture, where the so-called elites are determined to suppress free speech and the freedom of information. And I suspect this is becoming a growing concern for freedom-loving folk like you also. Because, number one, you're watching this video. And two, the danger we face is very real. Already we are being coerced into what to think and what to believe by the propagandists. Mainstream media, if you're wondering. There are also the increasingly autocratic administrations and the despots like Biden and the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudy, or it could be Judy too. He's the idiot on the left. Now, that venomous term conspiracy theorist is one of the censor's go-to tactics, which is why I absolutely hate that tagline, because it conjures up the stereotype of the far right-wing, drooling moron, wide-eyed tinfoil hat fanatic who spends all of his or her time inventing outrageous conspiracies tucked away in their parents' basement. It's a slur, of course, and for the most part it works because it shuts down debate and stifles the art of critical thinking, without which we have nothing short of an authoritarian culture. This is just one step away from a totalitarian government. Which is what, you might wonder? Well, think of Nazi Germany. It's a centralized system of government, dictatorial in nature, and which requires complete subservience to the state. Goodbye freedoms and human rights, hello slavery and misery. You see, the purpose of this smear is to project the image of the crazy person onto decent folk to discredit them and their ideas. In other words, to shut them down. This is the goal of all oppressive regimes, and I intend to prove this theory of mine to be a fact. So, all you censor-loving boneheads, you propagandists, you lying members of the mainstream media can kiss my grumpy old ass, because in this video and future projects, I'm going to expose you and your kind for what you are. Now, let's be clear, I'm not saying that the crazy theorist doesn't exist. They do. I've seen them out there myself, and we should be wary of them and at least do our own due diligence when it comes to their theories. But even they are protected, at least here in the US, by the First Amendment. And what is that for the uninitiated? Well, this is from the US government website, and I quote, "The First Amendment provides that Congress make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. It protects freedom of speech, the press, assembly, and the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances." End quote. Now that's pretty clear. We are guaranteed these freedoms. Yet they're increasingly under attack and denied by those who detest all that the First Amendment stands for. There are those out there who work feverishly to overturn this most important of our personal rights. Yes, you heard it correctly. Most important. That's why it is the First Amendment. This tells us how essential the Founding Fathers viewed these fundamental freedoms. Jordan Peterson, the now famous Canadian clinical psychologist, he makes no distinction between thinking and speaking. In other words, those who want to limit our speech are also actually limiting our thinking. And of course, this is the end game for the totalitarian. And by looking at the amendment itself, we can safely deduce that not only is the right of our freedom of speech under attack, but our thinking also. The thought police are already here. We also saw during the pandemic the forbidding of assembly, another infringement of our rights under this amendment. These people just won't stop. They don't care. They have stopped thinking and have assimilated far-left propaganda. They are just robots. Now, I may be sticking my neck out a little when I suggest that the group I believe most pushing the ideology of blind government compliance is the liberal far left, who are hell-bent on carrying out the directives of their malicious doctrine. Of these, we can certainly include big tech, such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. You know, the usual suspects. Of course, they don't see it that way, blinded by their dogma. However, it looks like Twitter's role in this arena may be changing for the good since the buyout by Elon Musk. Now, since we are discussing conspiracy theorists, it's necessary to first of all trace the origin of this mantra, if you want to call it that, to see just where and when it was first made popular. The findings may or may not surprise you. Now, in 1967, the CIA published an internal document looking at ways to counter the growing skepticism of the Warren Commission report on the JFK assassination. In this dispatch, the term conspiracy theorist was weaponized to discredit anyone who questioned the official narrative. This has been used very successfully as a ploy because it strikes fear and anxiety into the hearts of most public figures, not to mention ordinary folk interested in discovering the truth. This negative connotation of the phrase conspiracy theorist can be traced back prior to the CIA to Richard Hofstadter, who was a professor of American history at Columbia University from the 1940s until his death in 1970. In 1964, Hofstadter published an essay in Harper's Magazine which summarized the supposed task of conspiracies in American history. He speculated on the possible causes of conspiratorial thinking, and in so doing, he became one of the first in modern times to ponder the whole subject of conspiracy theory, in particular, its place in American history. The title of the essay was deliberately provocative, and in order for you and I to be absolutely clear about this, he emphasized that the title was intended as an insult. The title being, The Paranoid Style in American Politics. In this essay, Hofstadter did more than anyone to legitimize the view that conspiracy theories are the consequence of the paranoid fringe. This contributed enormously to the stereotype of the paranoid fringe-dwelling conspiracy theorist. Of course, the problem with this view is that conspiracy theories don't end at the fringe. They thrive in the mainstream also. But that doesn't matter, because for the propagandist, it's all about perception, how you and I see things. And if they can control that, they have achieved their goal. In 1967, the CIA picked up on this smear and saw the potential to use it against the truth seeker. In the previously mentioned dispatch, the agency used this insidious term as a weapon and didn't shy away from wielding it against any individual, or group for that matter, calling the government's increasingly clandestine programs into question. As if the government would ever be guilty of such things, right? Yeah, precisely. Where do we begin? They're all conspiracy theories. We never did that. However, and I want to emphasize this, similarly, the average lefty liberal, hive-minded blockhead would also, without hesitation, brand anyone calling into question the dubious antics of the left-wing Democrat-run government, a conspiracy theorist, falling completely in step with their thought masters. You see, there is a groupthink out there controlled by ideology, which demands of its devotees complete subservience. The left-wing libtards have been brainwashed into thinking that they alone have the truth, and therefore are justified in doing whatever it takes to get the advantage. The end justifies the means, in other words. Whereas in actual fact, they do not know what they do not know, period. And that describes all of us. And we should remember this when we want to forcibly foist our beliefs onto others. Now, I want to clarify my position here. I consider myself a kind of a centrist classical liberal, at least in part. I hold to many of the liberal ideals from a traditional perspective. But alas, the libtard, ultra-left boneheads have already abandoned many of those principles in favour of wokeism and other ridiculous extreme left-wing beliefs. They have moved away from the original base and are now inhabiting a twilight zone of crazy, disjointed reasoning and incoherent logic. I take no delight in castigating these people, but they are the ones who have alienated me, and others like me, who are literally sprinting away from their insanity. You also need to understand that I'm not talking about all liberals here. There are some who, I believe, still hold to the classic liberal ideology. Those who trust in the individual rights of people and not forced into groupthink. Those who advocate for a reasonable discussion of ideas, concept and viewpoints without melting down, and who truly hold to the scientific method and not just pay lip service to it, using it as a cloaking device for an agenda, such as was used during the insane COVID measures. You remember that false mantra, "We follow the science," when they did anything but that. Some big names also are beginning to see the light. Renowned liberal Bill Maher has come out with some blistering criticism of the woke left. Joe Rogan, Tulsi Gabbard, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, and Chris Hedges, to name a few more. These lefties can no longer suffer the absurdity of the far left. Coming back to the propagators of the slur, some of the more effective broadcasters of the smear is, of course, the mainstream media, who are experienced in the business of propaganda and information control. This is their forte. They put on a show of being impartial and fair, but in reality, they work for their ideological corporate masters. Dan Rather, some of you will remember as a journalist of note, wrote, and I quote, that rhymes, I'm a poet and I know it. Maybe. I quote, "A free and independent press, truly independent, fiercely independent when necessary, is the red beating heart of freedom and democracy." End quote. I fear those days are far gone. The media currently see themselves as the arbiters of our free speech. They are the gatekeepers of what we should read or hear, and therefore control how we should think. And while these so-called trailblazers of truth cry foul when the government attempts to shackle their freedom of the press, which we have seen is also encoded in the First Amendment, they often limit what their consumers read and hear. And as a result, they use it as a covert means of censorship. This hypocrisy has been made abundantly clear with the Biden administration's manipulations. Just look at the Hunter Biden cover-up with a laptop from hell, as it's been termed. The corruption is clear and may well involve Bumbling Joe himself. But the lefty libtard media remains silent, and their silence is deafening. And those who tried to bring this corruption to the public's attention were banned from platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and branded conspiracy theorists for their trouble. The double standard is breathtaking. And now we're beginning to learn that the FBI was behind the cover-up. But shh, deep state is a conspiracy theory. The trouble is, we now know big tech colluded to censor dissent. Zuckerberg of Facebook fame came out on Joe Rogan and confessed the FBI came to them and sought their cooperation. We must remember that Biden, who is morally bankrupt and has little to no intelligence, is more to blame for domestic and international suffering and fatalities than Donald Trump ever was. But in our Punch and Judy media shows, the victims are made invisible. It's all about the narrative, unless, of course, it helps the power hungry. I do not watch mainstream media for the simple reason they are toxic to the mind. We usually keep away from substances that are lethal for the body for obvious reasons. Eventually, they kill. The same thing is true of the mind. I get my news from truly reliable sources, real journalists, usually independent, who I trust to be impartial. Right now, as a direct result of the media's noxious influence in the US, well, we find that the US has become so polarized, I fear we will cease to become a functioning society. Real journalism, especially independent journalism, is under attack on many fronts throughout the world today. Even in so-called bastions of democracy, like here in the United States, authoritarian administrations actively work to muzzle dissenting voices in the media. You see, independent journalism is one of the cornerstones of democracy. And when a government has influence over the news its people read or watch, they also have power over the knowledge they ingest when it comes to time to vote. Yeah, back to Hunter Biden. The election outcome might have been very different had this story been allowed to surface. We can only guarantee that the public has a fair understanding of their government and its policies by defending independent press. And for this reason, safeguarding independent journalism is equivalent to safeguarding democracy. Independent media is in danger because it disseminates information that could be seen as being critical of the government or other powerful elites, endangering their support and influence. Because with this influence, governments can create a narrative that constantly reflects positively on themselves, but only when they have control over what the public sees and hears. They benefit from this by remaining popular and therefore in power. With this manipulation, they have the ability to spread incorrect or misrepresented information. And because there is no opposing voice to challenge it, the bewildered herd begins to believe it to be true. However, there might be some good news on the horizon when you look at the ratings of these peddlers of poison. Remember, the pandemic was a great boon for these entities. Audiences, terrified by the pandemic and their fears stoked by the fake news media, were glued to their TVs 24/7. Added to that, there was the election troubles. But 2021 saw a turning point in the viewership. According to Nielsen Media research, compared to the previous year, Fox Business News was down 47.5%, CNN was down 40.55%, Fox News was down 34.6%, MSNBC was down 29.7%, and CNN was down 19%. Newsmax TV was the only network that saw added viewers in 2021 compared to the previous year. It saw its daily viewership increase by 32.4%, and this is a right-wing leaning outlet. So what was the reason for this decrease in overall viewership at the time? I think news burnout is one cause. People can only take so much bad news before they react against it. Plus, many woke up to the bias. You see, more people are beginning to understand that a partisan or ideological take on the news is not journalism. We have seen corporate journalists on both sides of the divide warn, for their different ideological reasons, that democracy is in peril. The left is a little more vociferous than the right, but both sides are doing it, and for their own agendas. Both point at each other and hurl the slur, just to scare people. Good grief, do they think we are that stupid? Well, looking at some, maybe we are. But I guess in a bizarre sort of way, they are both correct. Kind of. Because as we have already stated, they seem to forget, or do they, that democratic freedom requires the press to be a check on power and a balance to power, speaking truth to power, Again, the reality is the partisan press is the real threat to democracy. They are the polemicists putting democracy in peril. Why do I say that? Because democratic liberty requires the press to ferret out corruption in government, not keep silent when they're darlings of the corrupt party. The press should bring to light issues the powerful would rather not discuss, to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable, as someone once said. I don't care what corporate media you watch, be it CNN, Fox News, the BBC, MSNBC, ABC, they are all partisan propagators of their own ideology. Today, journalists are motivated more by political fervour than the truth. This is the extent to which they have sunk. I mentioned earlier that many folk are waking up to the problem, but there are a great number who still belong to the bewildered herd, those who believe anything the media throws at them. Look at California. Look at New York, with their citizens voting for these self-absorbed, self-serving politicians time and again, whose policies obviously don't work. People who have a modicum of intelligence are realistically able to do so are moving away in droves from these crazy libtard states, while others are forced to remain through practical reasons, but given the opportunity would be gone. But alas, many are in complete sync with the ridiculous policies of the libtards. There is no saving such people. They are far too brainwashed, infected with mass psychosis, or mass formation as it's now called, controlled by a hive mind, a groupthink. They are the bewildered herd. The so-called conspiracies concerning censorship and thought control, pushed by the mainstream media as a smear against those of us pointing to the facts, and not the result of the crazy far right wing. This is for real, and it's time for the herd to wake up and smell the BS. I know I'm going to take heat for this video, but I have no problem with rattling people's cages. I'm a grumpy bugger after all, and they seem to have no problem in rattling mine, which they do on a regular basis. I have no investment whatever in what they think about me. Their approval is not required. I just don't give a damn anymore. But that said, we are, however, seeing great wins in the area of free speech, as I mentioned earlier with Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter. It remains to be seen how this will play out, but on the whole, this is great news. I cancelled Twitter a few years back when I saw the direction it was taking. I did the same with Facebook and PayPal. I simply moved to other platforms. We do have this power, you know. Never forget that. We are the ones with the influence at the end of the day, and the elites know it and are petrified of it. This is why they invest so much energy in keeping us ignorant of that fact. I don't know if I'll be signing up again to Twitter. Maybe, perhaps, if only to encourage Musk and his fight for free speech, if that's what it is. But I'm not a real fan of social media. I can take it or leave it, mostly leave it. And this channel is not for my sake. I'm not out to make money. It exists solely to attempt to wake up some of the sleepers and the less tardy libtards, to let the moo cows know they are being corralled towards the slaughterhouse. Right now, the unconscious mind of the bewildered herd is still under the domination of a sick thought system. Just look at how this system treated our kids during and post-pandemic. It's unconscionable, slapping masks on their little expressive faces, denying them the interaction needed for normal growth. And those of us who stood against this evil were branded conspiracy theorists. I was, for simply expressing the desire to move to a freer state. But folks, the tide is beginning to turn, and those of us who have resisted the fascistic libtards still need to be vigilant, because the enemy is still there, and you can be certain they will fight back with all the means at their disposal. I say, so be it. Gloves off. Knives out. Bring it on, bitches. It's time for old Grumpy, and you, if you are so inclined, to fight back. And we can do it together if we have a backbone. Many of us are already doing it. So what makes all of this so important? Well, free expression is what makes us human. The ability to communicate one's opinions, ideas, and feelings about many topics without interference from the government, well, that's referred to as freedom of expression. But the authoritarian despises the right to free speech because it empowers us. It enables us to fight tyranny and defeat the tyrannical. And why is it crucial we alert ourselves and others to the dangers of despotism? Well, dehumanization, that's why. We see this often played out in practice. The Nazis were masters at it. During the Holocaust, Nazis referred to the Jews as rats. Hutus involved in the Rwanda genocide called Tutsis cockroaches. Slave owners throughout history considered slaves subhuman animals. This is why it's important we wake up to the tyranny of the far left, because if we don't, this is where we will inevitably end. Don't believe me? Look at the crazy unconstitutional restrictions and mandates during COVID, especially in California and New York. Imagine if they had that power to an even greater extent. The mission creep, I believe, would ultimately look like China and North Korea. That's the slippery slope. Well, thanks for watching, fellow conspirators. I hope to see you the next time when we will be deconstructing other significant world events important to us grumpies. I'm the Grumpy Grandpa. Bye for now.